Hello everybody and welcome back to Screen Stars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2019 BBC mini-series of the famous Charles Dickens novel A Christmas Carol. And this mini-series was directed by Nick Murphy, and it was the people behind Peaky Blinders essentially made this Christmas Carol. And it stars Guy Pearce as Ebenezer Scrooge. We have Andy Serkis, we have Stephen Graham, Joe Alwyn, Vinette Robinson and Jason Fleming also making appearances in this mini-series. Now, A Christmas Carol is my favourite Christmas story, and most versions of it I can watch and enjoy for the most part. It's a timeless story, so the thought of a three-part mini-series, an hour-long episode, so essentially a 3-hour version of A Christmas Carol, from the people behind Peaky Blinders. Now, to be fair, I don't watch Peaky Blinders, but I know it's a really, really top show and a lot of people love it, and I will hopefully get around to watching it one day. It sounded really, really exciting to me. And essentially, it is the story that we all know and love in regards to Ebenezer Scrooge being visited by 3 ghosts and all the rest of it. Now, essentially what we have here is an hour and a half story spread over 3 hours. So how do they manage to do that? How do they make the story more interesting to spread it over 3 hours? Well, it's kind of an odd adaptation, and I remember commenting at the time, watching it with my wife. I sort of said I suspect Charles Dickens purists may certainly have a problem with aspects of this version of A Christmas Carol, because they do take some liberties here. Now, for the most part, I really, really enjoyed this mini-series. I thought it was really well made with some great performances. I thought Guy Pearce was excellent as Ebenezer Scrooge. Before I saw the mini-series, I wasn't sure he was the right person to play Ebenezer Scrooge, but after watching it, he was brilliant. He really, really was a high point of this mini-series. They made Ebenezer Scrooge here, a really dismal, awful character. Now, I know he's supposed to be, and in every version you watch, you see this awful miser transform into what we see at the end of the story, but he really crosses a line in this mini-series, Ebenezer Scrooge, to the point where I remember commenting more than once watching it, how is he going to get redemption here? He doesn't deserve it. Because this Ebenezer Scrooge, it really delves into his past here, and you learn that he's directly responsible for people dying in some mines that he bought in a factory fire, and all because they cut costs and bought the cheapest materials, which ended up causing accidents and people died. And some of the other things they did, especially with Bob Cratchit's wife, which is another area that they explored that we haven't seen. They really, really explored Bob Cratchit's family dynamics, and especially his wife, Mary Cratchit, was heavily involved with this story. And what Scrooge does with Bob Cratchit's wife, because essentially she needs money for an operation for Tiny Tim, otherwise she's going to die, and the only person she can get this money off is Ebenezer Scrooge. So she kind of goes behind her husband's back and basically begs and pleads Scrooge for this money, and he agrees to give her this money, but there are conditions, and appalling conditions really, what he expects for the return of this money. An awful character, the worst version of Scrooge I think I've ever seen. And the big problem for me there is, how is he going to seek redemption? Because he didn't deserve it in my eyes for some of the things that he had done. Now, my main problem with this version of A Christmas Carol is some of the liberties it took with the story. I don't think it harmed it. It kind of, in some areas, it kind of put a new layer onto the story, like I say, the way they expanded on his past and delved into his past and his psyche, Ebenezer Scrooge and the Cratchit family. But there were certain aspects, they had 3 hours to work with, and there were certain aspects that I don't think they explored enough. The relationship with his sister was explored in an unusual way, only because she played one of the ghosts, his sister. Now, normally, in the previous versions of A Christmas Carol that you see, you know the story and the relationship between him and his sister. But there was no real conclusion to the story of Scrooge and his sister's son, his nephew, that he sees at the beginning. You see at the beginning of every Scrooge story. He invites him to dinner, he always turns it down, and then you usually see the conclusion of that story, him going to seek forgiveness from his nephew and stuff, and you don't see that in this version, which I thought was a bit odd. It's almost like they didn't have enough time to finish telling the story here, but they had 3 hours, and I do remember thinking that by the end of episode 2 we still hadn't got past the Ghost of Christmas Past. Pardon the pun. So we had less than an hour to get through 2 ghosts, and for him to like see this transformation of him becoming this new person and this new version of Scrooge, and to seek redemption and forgiveness for all those people he had wronged. And for me, the first 2 episodes were fine, but I think they explored things too much, so it made the 3rd episode feel very, very rushed to me. But it was a very, very enjoyable version of A Christmas Carol for the most part. I could understand people having issues with it, because I do think they took too many liberties, and they put a lot of effort into the first 2 episodes of fleshing out these characters and people's pasts and histories, and then the 3rd episode, for me personally, felt rushed, and we didn't get enough of this new version of Scrooge by the end of the story. We didn't get people's stories getting finished off and him seeking forgiveness and redemption with all the right people. So I'm going to give this version of A Christmas Carol 7.5 out of 10. It was excellently made. I did enjoy it for the most part, but there are some aspects of the narrative and the story that I just thought were either over-explored or not explored enough, so it felt almost unfinished in parts to me. But very well made. I thought it was certainly better than the War of the Worlds version that they did recently. So yeah, if you get a chance to catch this version of A Christmas Carol, if you missed it, I'm sure you'll get it on BBC iPlayer and catch up, and see what you think. Let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time for more reviews on Screen Stars.